Welcome everyone to the May Accounts Receivable Core Committee. Glad you all could attend today. My name is Gerald Floyd. I'm the Statewide Accounts Receivable Management Coordinator at the Department of Administrative Services. We'll get started on our agenda today. First up for swarm announcements, the FY24 year-end AR training is scheduled for August 20th at 10 a.m. I will include this in the minutes as well as some additional email follow-ups, but wanted to make sure folks got that on their calendar early. We will be at the Labor and Industries Building, Conference Room 260. This is where we were last year. If you can attend in person, that would be great, but we will also record it like we did last year and be able to have you watch that if you're unable to attend in person, and then have you email us once you've completed watching that video. But hopefully you'll be able to attend on August 20th, and look forward to seeing you then. Moving right along. In our agenda, I've asked Todd Evans at DOR to kind of share with us some general information, a high-level overview about the account assignment process, things that they've been experiencing, as well as the overall life cycle of accounts at the Department of Revenue when they get assigned. And hopefully this will be a good refresher for some of you. I know with a lot of the turnover that's occurred, not everyone may be fully aware of the full process that DOR uses. So hopefully this will be valuable to everyone. So Todd, take it away.
Thanks, Gerald. So I'm Todd Evans. I'm the operations manager for other agency accounts, and I've been in this role since 2013. Prior to that, I spent about 17 months with the employment department in the overpayment benefits unit. And prior to that, I managed a private collection firm for a couple of years, and then with US Bank for 23 years. So I got a lot of experience with collections. And recently there's been an uptick in questions as to the timing of when certain processes happen with your debts assigned to OAA. So I wanted to go over some of the details with you to discuss the life cycle of the debts assigned to OAA. If your agency is subject to ORS 293, OAA has provided full debt management services for your agency since 2018. Full debt management services includes reassigning your debts to at least 2 other private collection firms on your behalf. If you're not subject to ORS 293, then there's a different path your debts go through, which is a lot less complicated. So for those agencies that are subject to ORS 293, I will be going over some specific details of what OA does with your accounts after they're assigned. Throughout my presentation, I'm going to be referring to Gentax and risk scores. So before I get too deep, I want to make sure everyone is familiar with those 2 terms. Department of Revenue operating platform is called Gentax. OA converted into Gentax during the fall of 2016. So that's just our system. And risk scores, every debtor in Gentax that has an OA debt also has a risk score that is refreshed every Friday. The higher the risk score, the more likely we think the debtor has the propensity to pay or the ability to pay. There are a lot of attributes that contribute to risk scores. Some examples of the attributes are wages, and the higher the wages, the higher the risk score is. Having an open bank account, a new hire report that we receive, if a recent tax return's been filed, if the debtor's made voluntary payments to Department of Revenue, if the debtor's not receiving financial assistance by the state, gives risk score points, having a phone number, and there are many more. Each attribute gives the debtor a weighted score that's referred to as a risk score. The customers with the higher risk scores do get prioritized to our revenue agents to work first. Okay, so as you all know, that you can assign debts to OA either through our web portal that we refer to as Revenue Online, or through submitting a file to us. Each day that debts are assigned to OAA, a response report is distributed the next business day to the assigning agency with the results of those assignments. This report is available to you in your messages inbox when you log into Revenue Online. When a new debt is assigned, it'll be giving one of three statuses: processed, under review, or rejected. If it says processed, that means that that debt was set up without any human intervention. So the agency would have assigned a Social Security number with a debt assignment, and that Social Security number matched an account, a person in Gentax, and the name matched. And so that's set up automatically same night that you send it over, and it's processed. If you have the status of under review, that means the assignment passed the system validation, so all the required data fields were completed, but the assignment suspended and a human needs to review the data before adding the debt. An example of something that would suspend would be maybe you assign the debt with the Social Security number, but that Social Security number was not in Gentax, or the name did not match, or if the debt was assigned without a Social Security number, our support staff will use the resources to find a Social Security number before it's added. And it's extremely important. Let me say that again. It's extremely important if agencies have information about the debtors that they could pass that information on to us. That increases our probability that we can find a Social Security number, which will greatly increase the chances of recovery. So full name is important. If you've got the middle initial, middle name, the suffix, so junior, senior, date of birth, address, driver's license, phone number, email. So once the debt is reviewed, it will be listed on the following response report, letting you know if it was processed or rejected. The third status that you'll see on the response report is rejected. The ad record did not pass validation and did not make it into Gentax. A rejection reason will be on the response report, letting you know why it rejected. The most common reasons is deceased or open bankruptcy, but there are other reasons. So make sure you take a look at it at the response report. It may have missing zip code, or the interest end dates not in there, and so those could reject. So if you fix that, you could resubmit the debt to us. So once the debt is set up in Gentax, the very next day, the first billing notice is issued. That billing notice is called the OA notice and demand for payment. And we get those out pretty quick. They're expected to be in the person's mailbox within 4 days after we set it up. If your debts qualify for a distraint warrant, OA will issue a non-docketed distraint warrant 15 days after the demand was issued. Now, a warrant has a very similar powers of a judgment, and it gives OA the authority to issue a garnishment. And then the next notices that go out is every 6 months, a statement of account will be created and mailed out. Those statement of accounts include other OA debts are added in there, and other tax debts that the person owes the Department of Revenue. They'll all be combined in one statement of account and mailed out every six months. For a little perspective, OA averages about 9,400 new full collection debts each month is what we set up. Once the debt is set up and all required billing notices are issued, we put the debt in a status we call collection status. It takes about 25 days from assignment setup for that to happen. Once it's in collection status, it's now eligible to be pulled by our agents to be worked. And it's also eligible to be assigned to a private collection firm if certain criteria is met. One common question I get is, when do we assign the debts to a private collection firm? The most common standard answer is after 6 months of no payments, but there are scenarios that can happen that will make that assignment to a private collection firm happen quicker. One scenario is when we companionate a debt, which means some other agency has or your agency has assigned a debt to OA in the past, and that debt is currently with a private collection firm. Then when we get the new debt assigned, we want to put all their OA debts together with the same private collection firm. So once all the billing notices are sent out and a warrant is issued, then the very next Friday, the debts will be funneled to the same private collection firm that has the other debts that we've already sent them. So they're all companionated together. Another reason why we would send a debt quicker than 6 months is if the risk score is at a 0. So there is no wages, no bank account, no new report, no taxes filed. Basically, we've determined this is a pretty unlikely account to collect. And so instead of us sitting on it for 6 months and potentially doing nothing because the risk score is 0, it's kind of at the lower end of our bucket to work. We want some action to happen. So we get that funneled to a private collection firm after the 25 days it's assigned to us. And the third scenario where an account would be sent to a private collection firm prior to the 6 months is if we have a payment plan set up with the debtor and 60 days go by without a payment. So they may make 1 or 2 or 3 payments, but then they miss the next 2 payments. That account can get assigned before the 6 months with no payments. But the most common time frame is after 6 months with no payments. Okay, the debt assignment will stay at a private collection firm for 6 months after we assign it to them. If they receive no payments, then we pull the account back from the private collection firm, and we'll hold on to that debt for 4 months. And during that 4-month period, if there's no payments again, we'll assign the debt to the second private collection firm. Then the debt will stay there. If any payments come in, that restarts that clock and could stay another 6 months at the private collection firm. And then after the second private collection firm has had the account with no payments for 6 months, OA will pull the account back to OA, and we'll put that into RWO status, which you could find that status on your monthly HIC report. RWO stands for recommended for write-off. And then I think later in this agenda, Gerald's going to talk about what to do when you see it in RWO status. But But remember, when it's in RWO status, risk scores are still updated weekly. If there's an increase in the risk score, the debt will be presented to a revenue agent to review and may act upon that new information. So if we got a new hire report and the account's in RWO status, we may issue a wage garnishment. Debts will still be eligible for auto garn. So Gentax automatically issues garnishments if certain criteria is met for accounts. And if the criteria is met on this account, auto garn, a bank or wage garnishment could still be issued. And then also debts are still eligible for offset when they're in RWO status. So debts will stay in RWO status until a payment applies to the debt. If an offset occurs, so we take someone's refund and apply it to the debt, it will still stay in RWO status because we figure that's a one-time event, not a probably not going to collect more money maybe the following year through the next offset, but we leave it in the RWO status. But any voluntary payment or garnishment payment, once it posts to the account, then it will come out of RWO status. So we may issue a bank garnishment, which takes about 45 days until we see any money. And your reports may still show it in RWO status after we've issued the garnishment. And it will stay in that status until money is applied. Another situation that does happen is if it's in RWO status and then your agency or another agency assigns a debt to that same person, the debt could come out of RWO status when it gets sent to the first round of private collection firms because the new debts that were just assigned had not gone through the round of private collection firms. So instead of leaving some of the debts here, we'll compendiate them all together and send them all to the private collection firm again to go through the 6 months at each of the two private collection firms. I think that's all I have, unless there's some questions.
Any questions for Todd? A couple of things I just, picked up on, Todd, is I know we've talked before, but I know with a lot of the turnover, I think those status reports after accounts are assigned, not everybody may be aware that they need to be looking at those. They may be just assuming, hey, I sent it over to DOR. I did my part, hands off, I'm good. Really reviewing that to make sure that there isn't a reason why that account might have been rejected, which therefore you would not then find that account on the next inventory report because it was never loaded. So be sure to look at those status reports when you've made the assignments, verify that everything was in and the account did get loaded and was not rejected. That's an important piece of that process. And then secondly, as it relates to the RWO, that piece that it is a kind of like you use the term living document for changes. RWO is not the end-to-all status of the account. Like you said, it can be reactivated for new data for a variety of reasons. It can be reactivated because of those new assignments and goes back through that life cycle again because of that companionation process. And so for purposes of the agency, understanding that when you look at your inventory report, you may take an action, and we'll talk about shortly about, reviewing that account for write-off status. If 6 months, a year, 3 years down the road, that status changes and it does no longer show as RWO, it doesn't mean you have to necessarily do anything. You just need to be aware that it was previously an RWO. Part of that can come from looking at the within the inventory report, what was the date of assignment? That may give you a trigger that, hey, this was from 3 years ago. So now it's reactivated, but I don't have it on my books anymore. It was likely an account that had gone through the initial life cycle, had been an RWO, you did a write-off. but now some new piece of data has come through, and you don't need to necessarily reactivate that account in your system until such time as a payment actually gets applied on the account. So it does make it a little more complicated when you're reconciling your inventory, but kind of looking at what should be on your books versus what's at DOR. And, unfortunately, that's just kind of a byproduct of the way that the Gentax system has to have that status code to be able to take certain actions. It can't leave it in RWO and still do other things. So it's a limitation of the technology. Maybe someday we'll be able to make, some system change that would make that reconciling process a little bit easier. But until then, it's just something to be aware of for the agencies. Looks like we got a question in the chat. Megan asked, are accounts automatically assigned to a PCF after 6 months? And if so, are we notified?
If there's no payments on the account will automatically get sent. There's no human intervention. It just gets sent on the first Friday after 6 months, and you would be notified on your monthly reports. There's the stat report has 3 statuses. It either says OAA, PCF, or RWO. And so when it is an OA, when the OA agents are working it, it'll be an OA status. When it gets sent to a private collection firm, it will change to the PCF status. And then approximately 6 months later, it'll change back to OAA for 4 months, and then back to PCF for 6 months, and then RWO status until payments get applied again.
The stat report will also, for the month, the stat report will list it as a T for transferred to a PCF. Because the stat report is listing all the A's, those are the added new debt in our system for the month. The C's are for the canceled, returned debts for that month, and then T's transferred to a PCF for that month.
Thank you, Nikki. Looks like we had another question about data about the debtor, and if it's not been verified, for example, if someone provides a date of birth, but they have not verified that information, should they still include it, or is it better to leave it blank?
That is a very good question. Because if it's inaccurate and it's supplied to us, that may put us down the wrong path, and we'll never find a person with that name with that date of birth. Oh. Is that for parks?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yep.
I could put a note in your account profile, in your agency profile, that information is not verified, but I would include it if that's what they put down, and include that. If you are able to grab a driver's license number, license plate number, we do have resources that we could pull up DMV data and put in license plate numbers and see who registered, who owns that vehicle, and trace them back to the person. So I would include the information even if it's not verified.
And
Can
I would
I add one more thing?
Please.
I was going to say, I know parks, they hand key in through Revenue Online their information. So I would also add that they could, in the additional information, just state date of birth not verified. And support would see that when they are working that suspended item immediately.
Good idea.
I would think that there's a number of times, even outside of parks, where the information is coming in on some form of an application, whether it be for a license, something like that. Yeah, the individual provided the information, but I don't know that there's necessarily the agency is, doing some form of skip tracing or whatever to verify that date of birth. It's just a field in the application process, so that when they're issuing the license, they can kind of tie it back to information they have about the individual. But I'd be interested to know if there's any true verification done, even in those situations. I think you provide what you have. It's probably better than nothing. So, again, there is a chance that they put something down incorrect, or even, when it got keyed into revenue online, it could have been, a mistyped entry that may cause that to show up as a piece that's then not going to match to the data that you already have. I mean, that's a risk I think anybody could have. But I think if you've got whatever information you have that you can share, it's better to provide it in most cases. So it's probably more helpful to DOR than not having it. One other follow-up I'd like to talk about, Todd, you mentioned the Social Security number, and there is an administrative rule on the use of the SSN. There's also the ORS 293-226 that talks about the use of Social Security numbers. And for debt collection purposes, there is a process by where you need to have obtained authorization to use that for debt collection purposes. That can be modifying your application process to have them check a box that says that they give you that permission by giving you that SSN on an application. Just keep in mind that your system may have an SSN, but that you may still be limited on being able to share that information. However, as Todd mentioned, address, date of birth, driver's license, car plate numbers, things like that are all things that will help them on the back end be able to connect the dots, so to speak, with all the information that they have to accounts that they have an SSN for, and can use that for the collection process, even without you having to provide that to them. So the more data you have, even if it doesn't include the SSN, can still be valuable to the work that DOR does. Okay, any other questions for Todd? I think one other thing that I'd like to kind of, Todd, you mentioned about the restarting of the clock. While there is we like to refer to about a 2.5-year life cycle for the work that OAA does and the different PCFs that are involved. Like you said, at any point, if a collection is made, it restarts that clock. So if OAA is working the account and at 5.5 months, there's a payment that's made, it starts another 6 months before that process would automatically then flag that account to be assigned to the PCF. If the PCF gets a payment at 5.5 months, it starts another 6 months for them. So that life cycle can be as short as 2.5 years, or even shorter if when you assign an account, it's companionated with a debt that is already at a PCF that may come back from that PCF and then go into an RWO status before that 2.5 years. So there's no set life cycle, I think, is the point that I want to make, that It can be shorter or it can be longer. We refer to that 2.5 years as sort of the standard. Nothing else has happened, no other debts. And so being able to use that as a starting point of reference, but it can be shorter, it can be longer for a variety of reasons. All right. Well, if there are no other questions for Todd and or Nikki, we will move on in our agenda. Thank you, Todd, for putting your thoughts together and sharing that with us today.
Welcome.
So next on our agenda, year-end preparation reminders. This is kind of something that we always like to bring up around this time of year. Again, kind of piggybacking on the discussion that we just had with Todd, complete your account assignments as soon as possible, if necessary, meaning the accounts are non-exempt. Thinking about your LFO reporting, if the account's liquidated and delinquent and it's not been assigned, but it doesn't meet an exemption criteria, then if it's been more than 90 days without a payment, it's going to be reported as such and under what I like to refer to as the self-shaming statute. So you don't want to be in that category. That is something that the legislature will look at and basically say the agency's not following what they're supposed to do. There can be reasons why you have data there, but you're not flagging the account as being subject to an exemption. That's why it's not been assigned. If so, make sure you're understanding why it's not been assigned. Otherwise, make sure you're getting your accounts turned over in a timely fashion. And then second bullet point here, complete your account write-offs based on the status of the RWO. Again, understanding that RWO can be a fluid status at OAA. But basically at this point in the years, I would start looking at those inventory reports and things that you have in an RWO status. If you have not written it off, that is the point at which you would then be able to review the account criteria under OM 355010, evaluate those accounts, use the proper MPCD coding for those of you that make your entries into SFMA. That is in the policy. That helps to identify which criteria the account met for it to be written off. But basically, this is going to help you in your LFO reporting to reflect that account as a write-off, so it lowers your ending balance for purposes of your L&D report. And so, again, that can stay in that write-off status until such point as with the account remaining at DOR that they are getting a payment 6 months, a year, 3 years down the road, whatever that may be. At that point, then you would reset up that AR to post the payment against, and then you can reevaluate the account at that time. Does the balance still meet the criteria under which you made the original write-off? Or, for example, if the payment was the result of, as Todd mentioned, maybe there's a new hire report and a wage garnishment was issued, and there's going to be future payments under that garnishment. You may decide to wait a few months to see what happens there before you would write off that balance. If that's the correct way to say that, write off. But basically, this would be a good time to kind of prepare for that year end and evaluating those accounts that are in that RWO status to be able to kind of clean up those ending balances for purposes of LFO reporting. And I know that some agencies do have some system limitations as to they choose not to perform a write-off because their system can't identify, once that balance is gone. If somebody was to try and, for example, come back to get a license, it wouldn't flag that prior debt needs to be paid before they could issue that license. I completely understand that. This is a general, conversation about write-off eligibility, not a direction that you must perform a write-off if you do have those types of system limitations. So just wanted to kind of make sure and clarify that. You would be eligible under the OAM, but certainly understand if you have some reasons why you don't want to make those kind of system entries for fear that you might lose out on future opportunities to collect on those prior debts. So that's all that I had. Is there any questions about the year-end preparation, reminders, kind of getting ready for year-end training in August? I know a lot of folks are probably looking forward to fiscal year-end and all the joys of that process that go along with the accounting aspect of fiscal year-end. But any questions? Okay, Rubiah. So the year-end training will be on August 20th at 10 a.m. at the L&I building. Other questions? Does anybody have anything for roundtable? Any topics that you'd like to bring up? Questions, general information that you're looking for and need help with that we can chat about here? Buddy? Okay, hearing none. Our next meeting will be on July 23rd. Note that is a week after our normal, third Tuesday of every other month. But basically, that would be the next date. That's just due to being out of town on the normal date. So looks like we had a couple questions come in on the chat. Is there any updates about the bankruptcy training? So the training through the National Association of Attorneys General, is that what you're referring to, Melissa?
Yes, that's what I'm referring to. Thank you.
Okay, so as far as I know, everybody that had requested access to that training has been given access to that training. And so you should have received an email both from me, but also from them with that link that gives you that access. I'd have to look and see, again, it's been a little bit on there, and we had a lot of people that responded. So thank you for all those that had that interest. If you have not been given that access, you created your account at their website and you did not get an email response, please email me separately and we can follow up with them on that.
Thank you.
And Jill, I said, do you have an online training for submitting claims to DOR? Todd, Nikki, is that something that you guys?
We don't have.
Go ahead, Nikki.
We don't have an official training. If you need help with that, I can do a Teams meeting with you and we can walk through the process, have you log into Revenue Online and show you how it's done. And we also have a technical guide and a Revenue Online user guide that goes through the process as well. So if you need those, you can email our technical email box or me directly and we can get that sent to you. And yep, there's the oaa.technicalhelp@dor.oregon.gov in the chat.
Thank you. And Rubia asked, when is the LFO report due? That is no later than October 1. We typically call September the LFO reporting period. I'm going to assume that by the time we will be doing the training in August, that the site will actually be available for entries. But basically, it by statute has to be completed by October 1. Okay, any other questions, roundtable topics? Things that folks just have burning questions on their mind? Okay, well, hearing none, again, our next meeting will be on July 23rd at 2 p.m. So we will see everybody then. Thank you all and have a great rest of your day.